take home the golden gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Todd Bensman, the author of Americans Covert Border War. He is also a senior fellow at the Center for Immigration Policy and an expert on immigration and national security issues. We are here to discuss something that was a theme of his book, which came out last year, but which has taken on a disturbing relevance to today, which is the issue of jihadists using the open border security crisis to infiltrate the United States. Why is it relevant today? Just recently, we had a terrorist cell plotting to assassinate former President George W. Bush. For those who are not aware of the details, the head of the cell was actually based in Qatar, but he had there was a US-based Hezbollah individual who was trying to recruit ISIS cell personnel to cross the border into the country. They were stopped before that happened, but it is a disturbing coordination between different types of terrorists, all for the common goal, using our own vulnerability against us. So with that, I turn to Todd. Welcome to the Washington Outsider Report. Before we delve into these very complicated issues that unfortunately not covered nearly as much as they should, and not nearly as widely as they should, please tell us a little bit about yourself, about your work, and how you became involved in this area to begin with.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the attention to me and the book, and especially the topic, which I think is very important right now because of the historic mass migration crisis that we are enduring in the United States at the southern border. How did I get involved in this? Well, you know, I was a journalist, a newspaper reporter for 23 years, and some of it was on the southern border in 2007, 2008, 2009. And I started covering this issue of Iraqis and people from Syria and Iran who were crossing the southern border. Very surprising. And I ended up doing a lengthy investigation of this, traveled to Syria and traveled to Jordan and Guatemala and Nicaragua along the migrant trail that they were taking to get here. It's very surprising and unreported that Iraqis were crossing the Texas border. So I wrote a 5-part series for Hearst newspapers, and it was very well received and won a National Press Club award. So, you know, this wasn't crazy fringe theory or something like that. And then not long after that, I was recruited, maybe even because of it, to join the Texas Department of Public Safety Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division. So I went from being a journalist to an intelligence official with the state of Texas, and I did that for 10 more years. And in the 10 years that I was in the intelligence business, a lot of it was spent on this issue, but from the government intelligence side of things. So I learned a great deal more about what I had been reporting as a journalist on that topic. So that's how I got involved with that particular topic.
To go back a little bit to what you just said about Iraqis, Syrians crossing the border into Latin America and going to Central America to Texas, what's the scale on which that was happening, and why, to your understanding, did they choose that particular route to get into the country?
Well, the numbers ebb and flow. They're never great. They're never huge, but immigrants who come from those countries, when they get here, are tagged and labeled special interest aliens. We call them that for intelligence reasons. It flags them, and then we can go and interview and make sure that we do more investigation on people from those countries than we would on people from, say, Honduras. FBI gets involved. So we call them special interest aliens. And I would say that every year, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 4,000 special interest aliens cross the southern border. It's not a big number, but it's also enough of a number that, you know, we have to worry about it because people are coming from countries where there is terrorist activity and organizations, and maybe the people coming over the border from countries like that are part of it. They might be part of it. So the way the routes typically work, I say typically, there are many different ways, but the primary route is, you know, you can fly from the Middle East through Europe and then to Brazil or Ecuador or Peru. One of those countries, Ecuador, for a long time did not even require a visa. The other ones are very easy to buy or bribe visas to. Sometimes they fly to Mexico and sometimes they fly to Central America, but it just depends and on what kind of papers and that they can bribe. And then they just travel to the border through Mexico and cross that way. So these are often aided by very complex smuggling networks that are uniquely situated in both the Middle East and in South America. Smugglers knowing the Spanish language and Pashtun or Arabic, and has homes in both places and travel documents that allow them to move easily between the two continents to help their clients get in. They're very unique smuggling organizations, these special interest alien smuggling organizations. So I hope that answers your question about how they get in or what the general routing is.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that they take airplanes to get into those middle, intermediary countries, raises questions about air security, quite frankly, and U.S. cooperation with on that type of security with those countries whose airlines are implicated. Has there been any policy response to these findings? The fact that these smuggling networks utilize airlines.
Well, the United States government has been aware of this for many years, and the U.S. intelligence community and federal law enforcement has worked closely with the governments of those countries to try to increase the level of impediment and difficulty to get on those flights and to root out bribery and corruption that often enables it, with some success. But obviously it's a big continent, South America, and it's not so easy sometimes when the subterfuge that is being used is really good. For example, somebody who buys a legitimate Brazilian passport from somebody, and the passport is in another name. So the true name of the terrorist suspect never gets checked. They just swipe it through, and things like that. Tactics like that happen all the time, where you are able to defeat airport security in, say, Chile, or in Santiago, or Brazil, Sao Paulo. So it's still pretty easy, and sometimes you can get you can buy visas, Guatemalan visas, from embassies all over the world. Guatemala has embassies. You pay a little extra money to somebody and they'll give you a visa. And then nobody's checking in Guatemala, databases. And sometimes, you'll see Mexican embassies all over the world, throughout the Middle East. Lebanon has a huge Mexican embassy. And there have been scandals where they were selling, Mexican passports to people for $10,000. You can buy Mexican visas and passports in Ankara, Turkey. I found these all over the world. There are many, many ways to defeat the visa system, the identity system, and just kind of get in. It costs a little extra money.
So would it be fair to say that the average person or family that goes on these convoluted journeys, they are comparatively well off, or at least have enough money to spare to afford this entire process?
Oh, absolutely. The kind of journeys that I just described that are smuggler aided, those can cost $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000. Just depends on what you get. 5-star hotels and limousines, or, a one-way trip to Brazil and then you're on your own. There's all different scales of packages that you can buy depending on how much money you have. The first Iraqi that I ever documented traveling did the whole thing for $4,000. And he just did it on his own. He worked a little bit on the way, made a little extra money, and can finish the journey. But if it's backed by a terrorist organization or a terrorist-friendly organization, $40,000 is what it costs. You got it. They can make it happen.
This does break a little bit the stereotype that these migrants crossing borders are all, poor, desperate people who laid out the last of what they had. Some of them apparently have, and others can afford to travel, in style. But that raises a question: what on earth motivates them to go quite so far to come to the United States when the path to Europe or even maybe Canada is much easier? Why do they go to endangering themselves and taking these risks to come to the US, where there liable to be stopped at the borders anyway?
Well, a couple of things. One is that it's often not so easy for people from certain countries to get legal permission to enter the United States. We have caps and restrictions, and if you're from certain countries, that we know the risk is very high that you'll overstay your visa. We won't give you a visa, even a visitor's visa, because we think you're from a country that has a high proportion of overstayers. They come in on a tourist visa and then they just say, oh, I declare asylum. So they don't give visas out for that. However, if you touch foot on American soil at the border and declare asylum, we have to take you in under all the current rules, and we have to release you very soon afterwards into the country. And then at that point, it becomes very difficult to ever remove you again. And so there is a very strong enticement in the way our system is structured for people to come in over the border. It's the easiest way, the quickest way, and the easiest way to get into America. Why do they want to come to America? Well, it's obvious, but I'll say it anyway. It's because, we have work here and you can earn a lot of money while you're here compared to where you could earn if you were at home. These are not true asylum seekers. They're economic migrants coming to work. If you borrow $40,000 for the trip and you can work for 20 years, it's a good investment. You're going to make your money back. You're going to pay back the people you borrowed the money from, and you're going to be earning a lifetime of money while you're in the United States.
What happens when they are supposed to present documentation of their asylum claims before the judge or elsewhere? Isn't it obvious that their claims are fraudulent?
Well, yes, it is very often obvious, but it doesn't matter whether they're true or not, because the asylum system is structured in a way that if a judge declines your asylum case, you can appeal it for many, many years. You can drag it. First of all, it takes 5 years even to get to see a judge. So by that time you have American children, it's very difficult for a judge to turn you down and then give a deportation order. That's one thing that happens all the time. But the other thing is that when the judge turns you down and puts a deportation order on you, you just disappear. Say, come get me. And right now under the Biden administration, there is no deportation. We ended deportation in January 2021 throughout America. So you're not going to get deported anyway, unless you commit an act of terrorism or serial killing or something like that. But even under Trump or a more aggressive president, the population of illegals is so large in this country, at least 11 million, probably more, that we don't have this, your odds of ever getting caught and deported are very, very low. So what they do is they lose and then say, fine, come get me. And they're in the country another 20 years.
So it's funny because, a lot of the overstayers from certain countries have had deportation orders and so forth, but it sounds like certain segments of these migrants do not face the same level of scrutiny. Would it be fair to say that there is some sort of a different standard for certain categories of migrants than for others?
Okay, I think I missed the first part of your question. I'm not entirely understanding. I'm sorry.
Would it be fair to say that some categories of migrants face higher level of scrutiny than others?
Well, special interest alien migrants that cross should face additional scrutiny.
Hmm.
They do face additional security scrutiny. They go through, sometimes an FBI agent will come and do a face-to-face interview for a long time before you're released. There is additional scrutiny for people from countries like that, or they're supposed to be. But when things are like they are now, when the border is overwhelmed and overrun, I think that very little of that is happening now for people from those places. Also, it's not only terrorists. Obviously, there are people coming from war-torn African countries where tribal militias are conducting atrocities in their countrysides, and we don't know if the people that are coming were the ones that were committing the atrocities. It's very difficult to learn what their involvement was in these conflicts. And we don't want to have warlords coming in over the border and getting in to live forever and ever because we don't even know who they are. That's not justice. It's not in the American interest to let people like that in. And also, youth gangs, very violent youth gangs. In Central America, we let in a great many unaccompanied minors who are in their teens from countries like that, and we don't know often what they were involved in their home countries, if they were involved in gang terrorism like that. And there's a wide variety of threats of the kind of people we would never let into the country if we knew about them. It's another enticement about the border that we're not able to check on everybody that's coming through. There's too many. Right now we're just letting tens of thousands a week right in through with nothing. I mean, we might get their names or the names that they give us.
Even with accurate information, I imagine it's extremely difficult to do the appropriate level of a background check if the country is in a very messy situation and if there is a lack of cultural awareness, lack of available language skills, and so forth.
Yeah, I don't think it's a language skills issue. It's more like the country that they're coming from, maybe pre-modern. Like Yemen or Somalia. They don't have computers. They don't even have governments to call and check. And sometimes the governments are hostile to us, and they're not going to help us, even if they could. They won't, like Nicaragua or Cuba or Venezuela. They're just not going to help us. Because we're diplomatically estranged or we have some kind of a problem with them. They're mad at us about something. So it's very difficult to do vetting of even in normal times when there is no border crisis, difficult to do vetting. Somebody comes in from Somalia, the caravan that's right now as we speak in coming up through Mexico, has a lot of Somalis in it. And Somalia did not have a government for 40 years. So anybody born during that time doesn't even have a birth certificate or a driver's license, or there's no death certificates or criminal records or anything. So they just say, my name is Mickey Mouse when they get to the border, and what are we going to do? We're going to let them in. They're going to claim asylum. We'll do the best we can with not much, and then just keep our fingers crossed.
So that brings me to a kind of a policy controversy, because for a very long time, and in particular during the Syrian crisis, there was this idea that was being pushed in certain circles that most of the terrorists actions taking place that have taken place in the US has been done by local, it's homegrown domestic terrorism by people who were born and raised here, not by asylum seekers especially, and certainly not mostly by migrants. How accurate was it at that time, and have things changed since then?
Yes, and I don't want to overstate the threat. We have not had a terrorist attack in the United States from somebody who crossed over the southern border yet. But I don't want to suggest otherwise. But the issue there is that that we have placed pretty good counterterrorism programs at the border and beyond the border in order to make sure that doesn't happen. And those programs have been largely successful. It's not that we haven't caught terrorists at the border. We have. And people on the FBI's terrorism watch list, we have. Every year, we catch people on the terrorist watch list. And that our Mexican partners in this program also have caught terrorists on their way to the border. So we have caught them, but it's because we have these programs in place that have been somewhat successful when things are calm and relatively normal at the southern border. The issue gets more complicated when you have the chaos that is happening now. When you have a chaos situation, then the risk goes up, the threat elevates up, that people are going to get through that you never saw and never noticed and didn't have a chance to check and didn't have a chance to get an FBI agent in front of this person. And the best laboratory experiment that I can come up with and to tell you about is the one in Europe, where in 2014, 15, and 16, they had a mass migration crisis that looked a lot like this. There were millions of people crossing the border. I would say the American one is now worse than the one in Europe, just numerically. But when Europe was suffering through these, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of, migrants and caravans just crossing over the border, ISIS, which was still intact and had territory, saw this as a grand opportunity to infiltrate organized, trained operatives. And they did. They put them right into the flows with fake Syrian passports and documents and stories claiming that they were war victims of the Syrian civil war. And they got in and they conducted the Paris and Brussels attacks that killed hundreds of people, suicide bombings. Well, all of the terrorists that conducted those attacks came in over the borders in that chaos and with suicide belts and automatic weapons and conducted these attacks. And furthermore, there have been attacks, every month or two in Europe from one end to the other, or plots to do attacks every year since, from one end of the country to the other. These migrants, they turned out that they came in the mass migration crisis, and now they're killing Europeans. And so, we look at Europe and, we learn, the lesson that we learn there is that, when things are this chaotic and very large numbers are coming across, these programs that I talk about are not working anymore.
Now, an interesting question to note is that Hezbollah cells are located all throughout Latin America. However, up until this point, they focused most of their attention on narco trafficking and assorted crimes, not so much on terrorism. And even the cells in the United States also focused mostly on criminal fundraising for their schemes and not so much in terrorism. But for the first time, we are hearing of a Hezbollah member actively recruiting towards an assassination. Is that a fluke, or is there a shifting pattern in the way these organizations are viewing opportunities, political climate, or their own strategy?
Well, like I said, in Europe, the command structure of ISIS saw what was happening in Europe and made an affirmative decision, an assessment that this was a really good opportunity. They understood that everything was broken there and that they could get people through. And I think that this recent case you mentioned about the FBI case, the Iraqi asylum seeker who was going to bring in a team of 8 former ISIS and Al-Qaeda operatives to kill George W. Bush. It's a brand new case, just made this case, that this shows that they are well aware also that the American border is now open for business, that it's an opportunity. That's, to me, is a very significant development in this threat issue. I think that in that case, they were able to have undercover FBI sources close into the center of that conspiracy. And thank God they were able to break it up. But had they not been there, those operatives were real. And they most certainly had the right idea. They understood that they could fly to Brazil. Remember, I told you about Brazil, the whole route. They understood that route. They knew that route. They knew how to do it. So it tells me that they're probably not the only ones, jihadists, who see what's happening at the border and want to exploit it.
It's interesting to note that another theory that's being pushed in certain policy circles is that Hezbollah, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, they don't cooperate. But it sounds to me like these former fighters have become mercenaries who go to the highest bidder, and that ideology may be less important to them than opportunity to make money and to fulfill common agenda beyond theological distinctions and differences. And also the case that Hezbollah and Muslim Brotherhood affiliates have nothing in common may have been significantly overstated by the experts on the subject in previous years, and it may be changing. So it's curious to see this cooperation from groups of very different ideological backgrounds that have been previously studied as completely separate cases of terrorist affiliation. I wonder if counterterrorism studies need to be overhauled as a result of these developments happening here and otherwise.
Well, you're the first one that I know that I've noticed to point that out in this for that case, and kudos to you for seeing that, because I noticed it right away as well, that this guy was an ISIS Al-Qaeda affiliated, which means Sunni affiliated terrorist, the Iraqi who is indicted in this. But the claim is that he brought at least 2 Hezbollah operatives over the border. And you're quite correct. Those 2 groups are like bees and wasps. You know, they don't necessarily get along, although we do see occasions when it serves both of their interests. For example, Israel. Hezbollah on the northern border and Hamas on the southern, they collaborate extensively when they have this great common enemy. And sometimes it's hard to understand when that is happening, that there's a collaboration purpose that's greater than their differences. It also occurred to me that the suspect's claim that he brought 2 Hezbollah operatives is false. We don't know. The court records don't actually say that it confirmed what he told the FBI source. So there's a question in the back of my mind if it's actually true that he brought his claim that he brought two Hezbollah operatives over the border. Now, Hezbollah operatives have crossed the southern border. We know of some that crossed. One of them was prosecuted in 2004 in a Detroit federal court and was convicted, and it all came out. He crossed over the California border in the trunk of a car and then went on to conduct propaganda and fundraising operations. And then he was arrested and charged with those and served time in prison before he was deported. And there are others that also from Hezbollah who have crossed the southern border. I think that's a great question. I don't have all the answers to that. I think that terrorism studies does recognize that there are times when Sunnis and Shias collaborate, when they do find reason to collaborate. I mean, I think that it's well established, for example, that the Iranian government, the mullahs, have protected Al-Qaeda operatives in their territory over the years. So it happens.
It's worth also noting that the founder of this entire effort has apparently been residing in Qatar, which has recently been elevated to the rank of a major non-NATO US ally, and has been repeatedly praised by various presidents from both parties as a major counterterrorism partner for the United States and its Gulf allies. This raises a question. We have a high-profile case involving an attempted assassination of a former US president, and the funding goes back to the country, even if he was not government sanctioned to do that. At the very least, the fact that he was able to operate in conducting a funding of a terrorist operation raises a lot of questions about US ability to cooperate with Qatar on these cases. So far, I have not been able to get a clear comment from anybody with respect to this issue. And in fact, this angle has been completely absent from the media coverage. Could you comment on that?
Well, first of all, wow, you're good. You're absolutely correct that the center of the conspiracy was Qatar, that the leader of the group that was supposed to be brought in over the Mexican border lives in Qatar, is based in Qatar, and some of the members, I believe, of that group are also in Qatar. What I will say is that we don't have details. I mean, they're not going to put that in a court case, the extent to which the Qatarans assisted us in this case. But I'm willing to bet a paycheck that they were involved in this case, that they are involved in this case. But I don't see any evidence of it, but I feel almost certain that the Qatarans, I don't know if I'm saying that right, the Qatar government and intelligence services would have helped us in this case. But it remains to be seen what they did. I think it's an ongoing case. There's probably a very significant intelligence operations happening over there. Does this guy really exist? Where is he? Is there surveillance? Did he leave? Are they going to keep him there? Are they going to put a no-fly ban on him? Do they have him? Did they arrest him? And maybe they've arrested him by now, but if he exists, they almost certainly are looking for him. If the Qatar government is not participating actively in this case, then we need to cut all ties with them and end any pretense that we have some kind of collaborative counterterrorism allied agreement with them.
We have had the same problem with the Saudis in the past.
Yes.
Where we had extensive security cooperation with them, but the members of the government in question were affiliated with Muslim Brotherhood and fundamentalist networks. And on the one hand, they fed us important information. On the other hand, they were largely, some of them were linked to the very same networks. And, this issue has migrated from Saudi Arabia now to Qatar. I'm seeing the same pattern. On the one hand, somehow these individuals are able to operate, and then Qatar offers its cooperation after they've already been caught, and it would be embarrassing or detrimental to them not to cooperate. So
Well,
I wonder if they're offering solutions to the problems of their own creation, or at least significant contribution to.
These are great issues for public discussion and debate, but you're right. I mean, listen, this is the problem with intelligence sharing with foreign governments is that you just take what you can get. You can pressure, you can arm twist, you can do, but in the end, you have to just make do, because these countries have their own interests, their own national interests that they will always serve first if they can, or their own personal interests in maintaining power internally and keeping their circle under control. This is not limited to the United States relationship with those countries, but I mean, look at the relationship with Pakistan. A very complicated relationship where the Pakistanis have to play both sides, and they give us what they can up to a point, but then all of a sudden we catch them, helping the bad guys. And, this is just the way it goes with the world. The Israelis have always had this problem with, the Palestinian Authority. I mean, they used to pay Yasser Arafat huge sums of money to just keep ratting out bad guys for them. And then when the money stops, then, or, if he wants more money, then all of a sudden the intelligence dries up, and it just, you take what you can get, however you can get it.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you about the messaging of this group here, which is interesting because first of all, the question is why George W. Bush, who's been out of politics since his presidency and has been painting pictures and just, enjoying his retirement, why not someone more recent, like President Trump, for instance, who had a tough policy on economic policy on Iran, and he is still considering potentially running for presidency again. Is there anything specific about it? The other part of that question is that we have seen Iranians actually target Trump government officials in disrupted assassination plots, and we have also seen a recent completely failed Iranian intelligence attempt against an Iranian dissident living in the United States. Is there a pattern to these events? Is there a connection, or are they all completely independent efforts?
Great question again. Well, let me take the Iranians first. Iranian agents, under Hezbollah's Unit 910. Well, they used to call it Unit 910, but I think they have a different name for it now, but it's the same thing. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, and they have, an extensive network of clandestine agents in the United States. We catch them every once in a while. and we put them on trial, and we put them in prison and all the rest of that. And we have, as a result, maybe intelligence collection opportunities out of those cases, and that my presumption is that there are intelligence collection operations that we will never know about, regarding the Iranians that come out of the U.S. based cases.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few years ago, there were two. In one was in Dearborn, Michigan, and the other one was in New York or Brooklyn, I think. These were 9/10 operatives who were planted here and were, full-on Hezbollah agents who were finding target lists and sources and information and stockpiling weapons. And these were the guys who were ready to attack if they were ordered to attack inside the United States. There are lots of sleeper agents like that, in Iranian sleeper agents like that. So I think that those are, again, they're going to be areas that the public may never know about or won't know about for a long time. And I just hope that they are doing damage back in reverse because of these cases. We catch them. There was one case in Texas a few years ago. Al-Babsiar was his name, his last name, I think it was. And he had a plot. It was a paid for plot. They gave him, the Iranian government transferred $100,000 to his bank account, and he was supposed to go attack the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C., and also George Bush. Contemplated attacking George Bush, and he got caught because he went to Mexico to hire cartel operatives to help him with the plot, and one of them was a DEA informant. So the whole thing collapsed, and he was a used car salesman, actually, this guy, but he was connected to Hezbollah, and he's in prison for a long time. The question earlier about why George W. Bush, I noticed in that particular case that the principal suspect looks to be about in his mid 40s, maybe mid to late 40s. He might be 45, 46. And jihadists, don't forget, there is no statute of limitations for vengeance on jihadists. And I think that's scriptural, if I'm not mistaken, although I can't name the scripture for that. But these guys, it looks like they were in the fight when they were in their 20s, when George Bush was president and ordered the invasion of Iraq, and they were fighters. He was an IED bomb planter. He claimed that he killed lots of American soldiers, and these guys don't forget. So they blame George Bush for causing chaos and killing a lot of their friends in the terrorist organizations. And why not get George Bush when nobody's looking, really?
Mm-hmm. So I think that also breaks down the stereotype of terrorism as something aimed at sending an immediate political message and just aimed at policy change. Sometimes it is a political message, but it's aimed not so much at policy as in preventing, just sending a message through revenge for past behavior.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. What's the question?
I think there is a bit of a stereotype that terrorism aims to, the main reason for terrorism is to implement specific policy changes, but sometimes it also could be a message for past behavior. It's aimed as a future deterrence, but not to anything immediate.
Right. Well, terrorism is political communication ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that your average terrorist organization expects to, destroy America in their generation, but they conduct an attack, and that sends a message of, we don't forget. Whatever you do today will get you 20 years from now. So don't do it. If you're a new leader coming in, don't mess with us. So, there's political communication is, one of the primary objectives of terrorism.
I think that policymakers should keep it in mind when removing terrorist organizations from the FTO, because sometimes they believe that just because a group has become inactive and hasn't been engaged in any violent activity in the past few years, it doesn't mean that they won't in the future and at the first real opportunity to do so, especially if they want to send that message to somebody else who they have a problem with. I did want to kind of come back to the border policy issue and border issues. There were a couple of cases in preceding years. One of them was last year, in fact, and the other one was within the last couple of years. The first case involved some Yemeni terrorists who were on the FTO who were caught at the border. And the other case involved a Somalian warlord who was found being engaged at the Reagan airport in Washington, D.C., of all places. After the initial reporting of these two cases that they were caught and found out, there was no follow-up on what happened with them. Were they deported? Were they arrested? Do you know anything about that? And does that again indicate a pattern of the fact that they, even if they are caught, more of them can be, are not caught and get in when.
So I think what you're getting at is, what do we do with them when we catch them? And I write extensively in my book, America's Covert Border War, about what we do with them typically. And what we do is we extract as much intelligence from them as we can while we have them in custody. And to try to determine as best we can who they're coming in with. Did somebody else come in with them? Are there conspirators? Why did you come in? What was your purpose? Are you lying about your life story? Why are you lying about your life story? What can we find out about you in your home country, what you were involved in, and that sort of thing. And then when we're finished, we deport them back to their home countries. There were two Yemenis, I think you're talking, we've had a lot of Yemenis cross who were on the FBI's terrorism watch list. I think I've got like 6 or 7 that I know of that were on the watch list in the last year or so.
I think those 2 specific ones I read about were not just on the FBI terrorism list, but they may have been on the sanctions specifically. But yeah, I may be wrong.
I know that one, these are border crossers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think one of them was on the no-fly list, which is a higher threshold of perceived threat and risk when they're on a no-fly list. And he had a cell phone SIM card hidden in his shoe too, which who does that? I don't hide SIM cards in my shoe when I'm traveling. If you're hiding a SIM card in your shoe and you're on the terror watch list and on the no-fly list, this is you're up to no good. There is no report. Listen, the government is very sensitive about these cases, and especially about border crossing cases, because Republicans make a big deal out of those and use it politically to argue for restrictions at the border, more restrictions at the border. But by the same token, the Democrats want open borders, and so they suppress information about these crossings so that they can take the ammunition away for restricted borders. So in that case, the reason we even know about those 2 Yemenis, CBP put it out in a press release one day, and I couldn't believe it. So I had 5 people send it to me right away. Did you see this? A press release, CBP put it out. And my first thought was, I got to get a screenshot of this before they take it down. And sure enough, by the next morning, it was gone. But you can still find it on the Internet Wayback Machine. But it's sensitive, this stuff, and that we don't really know what became of them, but I can probably guess within 90% that they were deported back to Yemen and probably into the hands of the Saudis.
Mhm.
That's my
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. My concern was that if people are deported, they can just get back to whatever they were doing beforehand and try again.
Well, that happened. That exact thing happened. I wrote about it. I'm the only one who wrote about this. Nobody writes about these
Mhm.
cases. But this was a case of a Yemeni who was caught in Mexico, northern Mexico, just about to cross into Eagle Pass, Texas, and he flagged. They all Yemenis their names are handed to the FBI in Mexico. This is all laid out in my book, these programs, and he flagged on the watch list. He was on the FBI's terrorism watch list, and so they did their thing. They interviewed him and extracted the intelligence and figured everything out. And then they asked the Mexicans to deport him. The Mexican intelligence officers who accompanied him back to Yemen returned home from Europe at the transit airport. And he got off the plane and came back. They caught him. This was in April of 2021, and they caught him again just about to cross an Eagle Pass in July, less than a year ago. And this time they were so busy with the mass migration crisis on the Mexican side. They had 200,000 immigrants cross through Mexico that month. It was a terrible month, a historic number of apprehensions that month. And they let him go. They just let him go. They had to clear the detention center out. The Americans were too busy. And the way I know about it is that they put a be on the lookout alert for him with this picture, which was shared with me. And the whole story of all this was in it's called a bolo. And I don't know if they ever caught him to this day. I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Do you think, from your experience, have some of the Islamist organizations in the U.S. been part of the pressure on the government to turn a blind eye on some of these cases or to implement less restrictive policies?
Yes. Yes, of course. Well, there are Islamist groups that have made forays into the White House to put forth their view that American law enforcement pressure on Islamists and terrorists is Islamophobic. We've seen a dramatic shift in this administration for the first time, a focus on Islamic terrorism to white supremacy is now the big. White supremacists are the big threat. And I think there's a lot of that has to do with, kind of public relations-y type influence operations by groups like Hamas and affiliates, people who are Islamists, Muslim Brotherhood groups that are constantly pressuring for an alleviation of law enforcement attention on their terrorists. I think that happens for sure. It's a real thing with this administration. They tend to have pretty good luck with Democrats, more luck with Democrats than with Republicans on this kind of issue. We haven't really seen a major decline in Islamic terrorism cases in the United States. The FBI is routinely busting these guys. These plots are still happening. Every once in a while they miss one and people get killed, and there are attacks that go through. small scale attacks. We had one a year or two ago in Pensacola, Florida, and another one in at the Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi. We have plenty of Islamist attacks and plots happening in this country still, but you wouldn't know, you might not know it because this administration is hostile to a narrative that shows that they're still kind of a part of a threat problem to the United States.
So
Did that answer your question?
yes, I just followed up by saying, would it be fair to say that public perception of the level of threat is heavily influenced by the level of reporting on that issue, and that some of the fact that even the way the voters make the decisions or on office holders is related to whether or not they fully understand what the threats and issues are.
It's directly correlated. Media attention drives political decision making. I like to think, though, that the FBI, as much as they're criticized, that they still have very significant counterterrorism programs. So, with or without public reporting, at least there's still some of that going on. But we have these attacks that are happening that don't get called terrorism attacks again. Case in point is there was one in Boulder, Colorado about 1 year ago, and it was an attack on a kosher deli in Boulder, Colorado, and 10 people died. This young Islamist jihadist attacked a Jewish kosher food deli grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm willing to bet that nobody listening to this right now would ever know that that was a jihadist attack, but it was. And there are lots of those kinds of things. We if they don't fit a media narrative that's current with the political party's wishes and the Islamist wishes, then it doesn't get called a terror attack or an Islamist attack.
My two last questions to you. What do you think can be done, first of all, to attract more people to report and write about all of this? You said that you're the only one, and as far as I see, you're correct. That's exactly what caught my attention. And the other issue, policy-wise, let's say we have a different administration who cracks down on the border issues. That still doesn't answer the question of what to do with all the people who are already here thanks to the current crisis. What would you recommend in that respect?
Well, your last question I'll take first. When you say all the people that are already here, do you mean people from special interest countries or everybody?
Both. I mean, I'd say both the special interest aliens and the general population of migrants.
Yeah. Well, so what typically happens here is, we're letting them in to the country, and on a presumption that they're going to claim asylum. And they have 1 year to do so once they're in to claim asylum. And if they don't, that means that they are here illegally and subject to removal orders. So and in absentia. So there should be a whole bunch of removal orders that will be in the hundreds of thousands, really. And so those are what we would have to focus on. So the ones that don't apply, and then the ones who do apply but are denied, they also get removal orders, deportation orders, but they never leave. So what the United States will need to do is put together a very sizable force of ICE deportation officers. I mean, hundreds. To clean this up will take a force of maybe thousands of ICE deportation officers to systematically find the removal orders on people who entered between January 2021 and then, and to track every single one of them down and try to deport them, take them into custody. I think that that needs to happen in order to deter the next administration or people in the net. They know that at some point they're going to get hunted down. They're not going to get away with it. It's a tough order. It's expensive. It's difficult to hunt down 1 million people. That's what we're talking about. 2 million, 3 million. But I think there needs to be some kind of a acknowledgement that they got in illegally and they stayed illegally, and that's not going to be accepted.
And as for the second issue, how do you generate interest and incentive for people to write about this more?
To write about which? The
border security issue, terrorism, and U.S. policy that has led to these U.S. vulnerabilities in general, and topics that are not considered politically correct or popular or whatnot.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I write about it, and there's a small part of me, I was a newspaper reporter for a long time and a competitive one. And I kind of like being relatively alone on this incredibly sexy story.
Mm-hmm.
I like to own a story, and I mean, I get what you're saying, but there's a part of me that just every time I go down, I'm scooping everybody. But I'm joking a little bit. So I don't really know. I mean, listen, the border, what's happening at the border is it's got transnational criminal organizations, which is always a good story, what they're doing. We all love the story, the television series about mafia guys. I mean, here it is happening in live time. You've got individual immigrants who all have incredible stories. We have government policy. It's a great story. We have corruption everywhere. Everybody is on the take, especially on the Mexican side, but plenty on the American side too. You have the corruption. You have police running after criminals, criminals trying to evade police, huge amounts of drugs, lots of cash, money. I mean, like, what better story is there? I mean, there just isn't a better story on the planet than what's going on at the southern border. And if people don't recognize that, or writers and reporters don't recognize that, good riddance, man. I'll take it.
Honestly, this is not just a story. This is a documentary or even a show right there. The way you described it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it. It's a great story.
I think you should. I actually just heard what a potential next book in the making.
I have a book. I'm writing a book right now. Actually, my second.
And what's that?
Well, it's about how this border crisis started and where it's going. So it's about this particular border crisis. It's the biggest in American history. Somebody's got to write a book about the biggest something in American history.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to not only reading it but discussing it in the near future. Thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. It's a must listen, and I hope people who haven't had a chance to tune into the program will have a chance to see it afterwards when I share the podcast. And thank you so much. Thank you to everyone tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time as usual, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. I thank you for watching and have a great night.